Bava Metzia, page 33. Today we're going to complete the Perek Sheni, the second chapter. The subject of prioritizing is a key subject in many different areas in Judaism, such as a fellow discovered a lost item, but one of them, the two items, one belongs to his teacher, his Rebbe, his Torah teacher, and the other one belongs to his father. Which one take precedence if you have a choice between the two? Similar question was asked by the late Rav Wojner. A fellow needs to enter the cemetery and he is short in time, and both his father and his Rebbe are buried there. Which one take precedence? And similar to that, the Maharshal asked, what happens if his father is the one who's paying his tuition, but he's not in the level of learning by any means equal to his Torah teacher? But that's not the only subject of prioritizing. Even subject of study itself, such as a choice between studying Mishnah, the oral teaching, or Gemara, the subsequent included Mishnah's teaching, versus study other subjects. This is again a serious question because we always need to prioritize and make choice. So therefore, let's study with the beginning with our Mishnah Kedusha. The Mishnah said, Aveidato va'avedat aviv, aveidato kodemet. Here, a situation that a fellow discovered a lost item, but it was, in one hand, his father lost item and his own personal lost item. So obviously if he can return both of them immediately, it's not a question. But if he is, for some reason, cannot do it, he needs to prioritize himself. In that sense, his need to take precedence. And later we expand on that. Avedato va'avedat rabo shelo kadem. The same if he is discovering two different lost items, and you have to pick and choose, so his need take precedence before his Rebbe. Aveidat aviv va'avedat rabo shel rabo kodemet. Here, if you have a choice between the lost item belongs to his Torah teacher and the lost item belongs to his father, his Torah teacher take precedence. Why? שאביו הביאו לעולם הזה ורבו שלימדו חוכמה מביאו לעולם הבא. Simple, basic reason. His father, which you need to honor by any means, is the biological father that brought him to this world. Versus his father is as much as he is the highest degree, is not the same as his spiritual father. And his Torah teacher, he is going to the next level, meaning we believe in this present, in this world, and in the afterlife, in Olam Haba, in the world to come. So the Mishnah tells us his father brought him to this world with all its importance. His spiritual father, it's combining of bringing spirituality to his life in this world and also advancing in his learning to have, which we call the next life, the reward of the world to come. So therefore, he needs to honor his Rebbe in the highest level, and obviously, as we said earlier, it's only in a circumstance that he needs to pick and choose one. ואם אביו חכם של אביו קודמת. If his father is also a Torah scholar, so yes, he needs to honor his spiritual Torah teacher, which is his Rebbe, but his father take precedence before his Rebbe. אביו ורבו, ואביו ורבו נושאים מסוי של רבו, so מניח את של רבו, ואחר כך מניח את של אביו. So here we are in a situation that, again, you need to use your imagination that his father and his teacher, Torah teacher, each carrying a burden, and he wants to assist them in putting down the burden. So the question is, which one take precedence? So here the Mishnah tells us that in this type of situation, he needs to go by his Torah teacher and then his father. מניח את של רבו ואחר כך מניח את של אביו. היה אביו ורבו בבית השבי. If is a situation, God forbid, that both his father and his teacher, both are in the captivity, so his obligation of redemption, they said, פודה את רבו ואחר כך פודה את אביו. He first needs to redeem his teacher, and then after redeems his father. ואם חכם, אם אביו חכם, the same matter as we said earlier, if his biological father is also a Torah scholar, he first פודה את אביו, he first needs to redeem his father, ואחר כך פודה את רבו, and thereafter he needs to redeem his teacher. So as we said, there is a discussion among many rabbis in Ilchot Kdima, which one take precedence. As we mentioned, the Maharshal hold that if one's father paid tuition for his Torah study, his father take precedence in all these cases. They called in Choshen Mishpat 264, and you see it also in Yeredeah 242, they both said that when his father lost item and his teacher's lost item, if his father is Torah scholar, so you return the father first. Otherwise, his teacher's item take precedence. And again, we have to remember that we talk about Torah teacher and a permanent teacher. Many rabbis differentiate between a loss of captivity and lost item, and you see more on that if you zoom in the Rambam, Ilchot Matnot Aniyim, chapter 8. Menah Hane Mile. From where we derive this important halachot of return items. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Amar Kra. Here is the verse, is a pasuk, Book of Dvarim, chapter 15. Efes ki lo yeh becha evyon. The Torah said only so that there shall be no needy among you. So what do you understand? It is like indication, it's a commandment that is incumbent upon each individual to ensure that he will not become needy. And consequently, they said, Shelcha kodem l'shel kol adam. You need take precedence, your property, you need take precedence before anyone else in order to avoid poverty from person. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol HaMekayem be'atzmo kach, sof ba lidei kach. So here is some type of important derivative of halacha, that you have to put a balance in everything in life. The Ein Yaakov expanded that, and he says there are people who are overprotected over their assets, and sometimes their behavior is so selfish that it may cause them poverty, because in a way it's like a sgula, a good advice, that what save a person from, God forbid, becoming impoverished is that he prioritizes and always make sure that his interests, as much as he cares for himself, should not be to the extreme, and sometimes he needs to put his interests aside and care for others. The Mishnah continues, היה אבי ורבו נושאים מסוי, מניח את של רבו, ואחר כך מניח את של אביו. Here we have a situation that his father and his Rabbi, his teacher, carry as a burden. So need to make a choice. So they said he need to take care of his teacher, Rabbi, first, and then his father. Tanu Rabbanan, Rabo she'amru. What the rabbis tells us, the importance of taking the Torah teacher first, that before his father, רבו שלימדו חוכמה, meaning there's a first view that said that that's applied to his Torah teacher, the teaching which we call in our language טעמי איסור והיתר, to understand the svarot, the understanding of the differentiation between chayav and patur, between right and wrong, and all the depth on that. That's one way. ולא רבו שלימדו מקרא ומשנה דברי רבי מאיר. So the first view of Rabbi Meir said that's applied to Rabbo, to his teacher that taught him the depth of understanding the Torah, not the one who just teach him the Mikra, the very basic literal understanding of Tanakh or Mishnah, without going to Iyun. In the yeshiva world, it's called the difference between Girsa, just learning the basic literal text, or Iyun, understanding the depth of the text. So that's the first view of Rabbi Meir. He said that that solely applied to the Rebbe who's teaching the depth of Isur והיתר. Rabbi Yehuda אומר, כל שרוב חוכמתו הימנו. He says it's not necessarily one who teaching the understanding between Isur and Heter, but anyone that he reaches wisdom, meaning the profound analysis of the Torah that constitute the Talmud, is important. But in that sense, be any teacher, can be one who teaching Torah, one who teaching Mishnah or Talmud. That's already considering his Rebbe. רבי יוסי אומר, אפילו לא האיר עיניו אלא במשנה אחת, זהו רבו. Even if you have a teacher that enlightened him in understanding only one single Mishnah, that's already considered as a teacher. I'm sure you remember the Pirkei Avot. They speak about teachers of David HaMelech and more. One of my teachers was the late Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who is a student of Rabbi Isser Meltzer. So he used to say that he sit not only in the regular classes of Rav Meltzer, but also in those extemporaneous, unprepared sessions with Rav Meltzer in order to get the mindset, the thinking and understanding of Torah scholars. And the Hasidim speaks about one of the great luminary in the Hasidic world, the late Reb Chaim of Tzanz, Rab Halberstam, who gave tremendous respect to his early childhood teacher because he said that he taught him Torah min Hashamayim, he taught him the very basic sacredness of the Hebrew Aleph Bet. But anyway, as you see here, you have three views of the definition of one's Rebbe. Amarava, what Rabbi Yossi here refer by saying that even you learn one Mishnah, Kegon, he was an example, Rav Schora, name of the rabbis at that time, the Asberan Zuhama Listeron. Here is an example of Rav Schora that explained to us a utensil with a spoon on the end and a fork on the other. So here is a Mishnah in several places in Tractate Kelim that speak about taking away zohama me'amachal, taking away that part that doesn't need to be on the food, and because it's a little details involved with all kind of technicality, that understanding from that scholar makes him his teacher, his Rebbe. Without his teaching, he was not able, Rav Schora, to understand that. So that's what he meant by saying Rabbi Yossi, that one Rebbe teaching one Mishnah. Shmuel Karamanei. Shmuel was one of the top scholars, you know, Gadol Merebi Shmo, that if you mention just the name, it's the highest. So there is a halacha of tearing garments when one, God forbid, lost his loved one. So because Rebbe carries so many important life teaching and lifelong understanding of Judaism, so Karamanei Aleya Hu Merabanan the Asberei Echad Yored Le'amat HaShechi V'Echad Potech Kivan. Here it was a subject which you find in Tractate Talmud chapter 3. They're speaking about the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim. So they have different gates and different entrances. You can study in Talmud. We explained some of that. But because, again, it was a lot of technicalities, the room in one of those doors that the Kohen need to get his hand deeper in order to open certain part of the door, and his explanation how he squeeze and stretch his hand and which way to open and all the technicality involved in that building. So Shmuel had this teacher, his Rebbe, that explained to him all the details how that can be. So therefore, when that great scholar was no longer among the living, Shmuel tore his garments. Again, another example of someone who enlightened someone in understanding the Torah is already giving the highest respect as his teacher. The late Rav Ruderman asked Rav Hirschsprung, one of the greatest past generation scholar, what exactly he derived so much from his teacher. It was Reb Shimon, was the Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin. We explained many times. That was the luminary code yeshiva that not only the greatest Torah scholars of the previous generation came from, but actually my brother-in-law, Rav David Avram Mandelbaum, published several books on that Yeshivat Chachmei Lublin. So anyway, the story goes that Rav Hirschsprung told Rav Ruderman that he learned from his Rebbe particularly one subject, that it was a question of certain understanding of kashrut of vessels. And those days, in order to travel from one location to another, you need to go by those all days train. And the Rosh Yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin traveled 3 days back and forth on a train just to see that certain vessels and understand the mindset. Meaning he had this will to understand every detail in the Torah, that even it's cost him all these 3 days of traveling to get to the bottom. So just again an example of greatness even in the relatively small, meaning just one item in the studies. אמר אולה תלמידי חכמים שבבבל עומדים זה בפני זה וקוראים זה על זה. So here he speaks about the Torah scholar who live in Babylonia. So they want to show great admiration and respect to each other. So they rise when they see each other and stand up for them in honor, or if there's a loss, they rend the garment in mourning over one another passing, versus those in Eretz Israel, where the permanent Torah scholars and teachers serve as the head of the Torah yeshivot. In Babylonia, most scholars study Torah with peers, and there is no permanent teacher. ולעניין אבידה, when it's come to a question of lost item, במקום אביו אינם חוזרים אלא לרבו מובהק. So when it's come to a lost item, so both one's father and one's teacher lost an item, he returns the lost item only to his permanent teacher before return to of his father, and not to his peer or to one who taught him the meaning of one Mishnah or one item. So those years, the students ask Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, what do you do in a kollel? What do you do in a shiva? And there are a lot of Torah scholars. So he said that they should mochalim ze lazeh, they should let go each other in advance, so therefore it will not have it be too Torah, they don't need to stand up all the time for each other. As a personal note, I used to study for about 14 years with several great Talmidei Chachamim in Baltimore. I used to study in Eretz Israel with Rabbi Shub, with Rabbi Sadik, with others, Rabbi Weisberg. So every time I have those commotions, which I never liked, I work in the Beit HaMidrash and people start standing up, And I said to my chavruta and a few others, if you keep doing that, I'm not coming. Anyway, Kab'ei minei Rav Chizda me Rav Huna. Rav Chizda asked his teacher, Rav Huna, Talmid vetzarich lo rabo mai. Here, you talk about exceptional smart students. ומכל מלמדיי השכלתי ומתלמידיי יותר מכולם. Sometimes you have students that enhance your wisdom and guidance more than anyone else. So you have a situation, Talmid, the students, and his Rebbe needs him. I can say proudly that my son-in-law, Harav Reuven Shmuel Deutsch, he is, they call him in Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavneh the walking computer. But anyway, I remember one of the Roshei Yeshiva, David Kav, he referred when Reuven came here to the United States, right after they get married, he said, I miss our computer, our walking computer, because in the middle of the shiurim, he gives me all the sources right away. So here is an example, Talmid, a student, vetzarich lo rabo, that the Rebbe derived learning from his students. So how exactly that student should treat his Rebbe? If, for example, there are two lost items, one is his father and one is his Rebbe. So, the simple understanding of this sugya, we just read it, Amar le chizda chizda lo tzrichin elach. He said to him, repeat the word chizda, chizda, I do not need you. On the contrary, you need me until you complete 40 years of study before me. So, there are several understandings. There is the Maharsha that said that you just need me, I don't need you. There is another one of Rabbeinu Hananel that goes differently, but unfortunately, they grew angry with each other over the perceived insult and the harsh reaction, and each did not return the visits to others. Yativ Rav Chizda 40 ta'anita mishum dechalash da'atei de Ravuna. So Rav Chizda, a righteous man, was commit himself to fast, and he fasted 40 days due to the fact that Rav Huna was offended, although he did not have the intent to offend him. And the same the other way around. Yativ Rav Huna 40 ta'anita mishum dechashdei Rav Chizda. Go the other way around. Rav Huna observed 40 fasts due to the fact that he is erroneously suspected that Rav Chizda was referring to the relationship between them in such a way. So here you derive a lot of the importance of Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, serving the Torah scholar, and many of the greatest Gdolei Israel, the greatest teachers, gets their knowledge from Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, serving Talmidei Chachamim. My dear colleague and friend, Rav Berger of Baltimore, he served Rav Eliashiv for many years before he became a community rabbi. The Maran HaChazon Ish, the great Rav Karelitz, referred to the commentary in the Talmud, Rabbeinu Hananel, that he reached his acceptance because he served the greatest scholars of his generation above and beyond. Itma. Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So here is one view that said that Halacha follow Rabbi Yehuda, that the Rebbe is someone that we have most of the wisdom from. Rav Acha Bar Avuna Amar Rav Sheshet Halacha Rabbi Yossi, meaning even your Torah teacher enlightened you in one important Mishnah, that's sufficient to give him the highest respect. It's a painful story about the Khatam Sofer. It was a great rabbi in Hungary that the story goes that one time he started delivering a talk on behalf of great rabbi that was no longer among the living, whose name is Rabbi Moshe Weisblum. And all of a sudden, he was about to say what he had to say, and he stopped speaking. And he couldn't continue. The next day he came and he says that he had a very heavy-duty dream. And he described how in heaven they are very harsh with him. And only when he met during his dream Rabbi Moshe Weisblum, and they appease him and apologize for the way he referred to him, then he was able the next day to deliver that talk, which he wanted to teach us, the Khatam Sofer, how dangerous it is to speak by any means against Torah scholar. ומי אמר רבי יוחנן הכי? That halacha follow Rabbi Yehuda. ואמר רבי יוחנן הלכה כסתם משנה, ותנן רבו שלימדו חוכמה, מהי חוכמה? רוב חוכמתו. So here, what we learn in Mishnah, we learn that you have an attribute opinion that said, what speak about Rebbe, his teacher, the one who taught him the wisdom of the Torah. The ruling of unattributed Mishnah is following the view of Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara answers, what is the meaning of wisdom in this context? And Rashi, I think, struggle here to understand what does that mean when you speak about the preference between the Rebbe and his teacher. And Rashi used the word klomar, which we always said is something that bothers him. And he said, klomar kodem le'aviv le'inyan avedah, that Rashi wants to emphasize when it's come to lost item that he take precedence in the prioritizing his Rebbe, because he holds that that's applied to rov chokhmato, the majority of his wisdom. So even though the Mishnah follow Rabbi Yehuda, that's follow the principle of Rabbi Yochanan, that halacha kestam Mishnah, but here Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef said on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan that halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. The Magen Avraham asked a question in regards to our days. He says, in our days, do you have Rav Muvhak? Do you have a permanent teacher? Why? Because he argued that most of the learning in modern days is from books, sacred books. And that's a big discussion in the Dolei Lita, great Lithuanian Torah teachers. What's carry more weight? In the yeshiva world many years ago, we used to separate the day. Some part of the day we study Girsa, just a very basic text of the Gemara, and some hours later we dealt with Iyun, going deeper. So the great Rav Steinberg, who was the rabbi of Warsaw in those days before the war, he says that the very basic, you can go to Iyun, you can go further in any level if you don't have the Girsa, which he holds to study Gemara and Rashi, are always connected the text with study of Rashi, and that's the foundation in order to go to the next level. But anyway, the whole subject of Rabbi Muvhak is a subject that Magen Avraham argued nowadays if there is a permanent teacher. The next one is the subject of prioritizing between Mikra and Mishnah. This we need to have some introduction, in addition to the issue of way before printing press and way before any form of some normal studies that we recognize in the modern beautiful world. At that time, it was a segment and section of people study different subjects with different teachers, and it was some issue. Soon you see that people who study Gemara were a little bit condescending to people who only study Mishnah. They argue that you cannot study Mishnah and pasken halachot and follow Jewish law just based on the foundation of Mishnah, because remember the Gemara contain also Mikra and Mishnah both. Tanu Rabbanan. Ha'oskim b'mikra midah ve'eina midah, which means most of the rabbis hold that at the time of this written, it wasn't the Gemara yet. So they said here that those who occupied, engaged in the study of Torah, it is a virtue, but not complete virtue. Why? Because the derivative later on of oral teaching of Mishnah and Gemara carries more practical and more importance, and it also combined the Mikra. B'Mishnah midah v'notlim alea sachar. So studying Mishnah is important, and you receive a reward. But says when it's come to Gemara, as we said many times, it's studied at the next level, which is combining of all. Ein lecha midah gdola mizo. You have no virtue greater than that. U'le'olam heveiratz lamishnah yoter min ha'Gemara. You should always go and study Mishnah more than study Talmud. So obviously it's a contradiction. Hagufa kashya. It's what you just contradict yourself. אמרת בגמרא אין לך מידה גדולה בזו, והדר אמרת לעולם ורץ למשנה יותר מן הגמרא. At the beginning you said that the Gemara is nothing more important than that. We said it's combining Mishnah and Gemara. And then you tell me that the most important thing is to study Mishnah. How come? So the Gemara responded and explained, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan explained 33b, Bimei Rabbi Nishnet Mishnah Zo. The time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that the beginning of this Braita extolling the study of Talmud was taught. So Rashi expanded on that. We know that it was a many generation, that wasn't any disputation, just transmitted orally. But from the time of Hillel and Shammai, the time of the pair, which was the 3 generations before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, there was so many contradictions, as several sources tells us, that it was like 2 Torts, and because it was so much persecution against Jewish people, and it was a fear that people will forget what they learn and more, it was a great opportunity that the king of Rome, his name is Antoninus, he get together all the great scholars and they put things together. Rabbeinu Tam explained that there was a special reason to engage in the study of Tanaic literature, specifically during the generation of Yehuda Nasi, and as Rabbeinu Hananel explained and tell us that so Yehuda Nasi was engaged in the task of redirecting the Mishnah. It was absolutely crucial that a Torah scholar assist him in analyzing the material in order to ascertain which material will be included in the Mishnah and ensure that the versions of the text were totally accurate. The great Hasidic story is about Rabbi Mordechai of Nadvorna, is that he spread the importance of study with the Rashi, with the Chumash, Rashi with the Talmud, and he hold that brings length of life. But the Bet Ephraim and many others say that that's part of the discussion. It's the importance of study the Mishnah, the Tosfot Yom Tov and others said with the commentary. But anyway, Shavku Kula Alma Matnitim, Vazlu Batar Gemara. They all left to study Mishnah and they study Gemara. הדרדרה שלו עולם מבלס למשנה יותר מן הגמרא. מהי דרוש? כי דריש רבי יהודה ברבי אלי, מהי דכתיב? There is a very interesting line in the book of Isaiah, chapter 58, הגד לעמי פשעם ולבית יעקב חטאותם. Declare to my people their transgression, and the Beit Yaakov the house of Jacob their sins. So what does that mean? Apparently, it looks like superfluous. It's like two different segments of the nation. So the Yoni Yaakov and others explain the way it should be, the first glance should be Haged le'ami pish'am vechatatam. That makes more sense. Declare to my people their sins and their lack of doing or sin. הגל להעמיד פשעם אלו תלמידי חכמים ששגגות נעשות להם כזדונות. So the first part, tell my people their transgression that apply to Torah scholar, whose those unintentional transgressions become for the 10th mount to intentional transgression due to their tremendous erudition. They are held to a higher standard. ולבית יעקב חטאותם אלו עמי הארץ. The second part of the pasuk, and the house of Jacob their sins, that applies to uneducated people. שזדונות נעשות להם כשגגות, that actions that are apparently intentional we treat it as unintentional because they don't comprehend the severity of the transgression. והיינו דתנן, this is a Mishnah we study in Ethics chapter 4 Mishnah 16, well-known Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda meaning Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, Omer, Heve Zahir Batalmud, be careful to study scrupulously the Torah, Sheshigigat Talmud Ola Zadon, because if you make a mistake, unintentional misinterpretation of the Talmud is considered as intentional transgression. So the Minchat Chinuch explained when we have let's say a sinner. So in those days, someone who committed the sin needs to bring offering. Nowadays, we have the text that's reading that it's substitute with our lips, and we express the Parashat HaKorban, we do confession, but the Avi Ezri bring the Vilna Gaon that he said that that's not sufficient. You have to have your heart involved with those lip service. And based on that, there is a well-known story of, again, Maharam Shapira Zatzal Milublin. He brought a beautiful verse in the Torah. We said, V'nislach lechol, what we said in Yom Kippur, that it's forgiven to all ha'am, all the nation, V'lager agar betocham, and also the ger, the convert among them, ki lechol ha'am bishgaga, because the whole people, it's unintentional. So that he brought the famous teaching of the Chafetz Chaim that said, why you put here in the verse the convert? What one has to do with the other when you speak about forgiveness of the nation? So he said, trace the situation. Someone converted to Judaism at an advanced age. Let's say that person is 65 years old and now he went through all the process of Giyur and is now part of Jewish faith. So sincere Ger Tzedek that passed all the hardship and now is part of the Jewish nation, committed unintentional sins. So what do you say? You can say, he come to you and he said, for so many years I get used to something that, you know, even sometimes it's kind of intentional in some ways, but obviously I'm doing it out of routine, out of something that gets used for so many years. So we let go, we let go those, and we consider all of them as unintentional. So he said the same way as when we speak about the nation that so many years suffer galut, suffer exile, and so much persecution. So therefore, when Islach lechol am Yisrael, we take the whole nation as the same matter as we take v'lager akar betocham, ki lechol ha'am, all the nation who suffer so much galut, so much exile, bishgaga, take it as get used to those wrongdoing. דרש רבי יהודה ברבי אילאי, מה דכתיב שינו דבר השם החרדים על דברו, That's a verse in Isaiah 66 that said that you should hear the word of God who is tremble at his word. So the Elu Talmidei Chachamim, that's applied to Torah scholar, that they always go and search scrupulously to understand clearly the meaning of the text. Amru Acheichem Elu Baalei Mikra, that's applied Acheichem, those who just studied the Torah, who are aware of their shortcomings and treat the Torah scholars with deference. Son'achem elu baalei Mishnah. So here he speaks about Son'achem, those who despise you. And why they use that term? So Rashi brought, based on Gemara in Sotah 22, that unfortunately it was two categories, which is people that we study Mishnah only, people who study Gemara, and people who study Gemara, they talk down to people who study Mishnah. They call him Mevalei Olam, people who waste their time, because you cannot pasken halacha, you cannot rule just based on the Mishnah. Menad deichem elu amei haaretz, those who the text said ostracize, put ban against you, applies to those are uneducated, who distance themselves with their actions from the Torah scholars. Shema tumar pasak sivram uvatal sikuyam. You can say that those groups who are not Torah scholars, their hope has ceased and their chances are eliminated. Talmud lomar v'nir'eh b'simchatchem. It said that there is a hope that we will see v'nir'eh, that they all will see a good hope, which again is indication that that group that we mentioned will gaze upon the joy of the Torah scholars. Shema Tomar Yisrael Yevoshu, Tolmad Lomar Vehem Yevoshu, Ovdei Kochavim Yevoshu, V'Yisrael Yismachu. So here we speak about a prophecy of the end of the days, that those idol worshippers will be ashamed, and those who follow the Torah path and the Jewish nation will receive a joy, and that's what we wish Kol Yisrael Yismechu Bizman HaGeulah. All the nation will have a great rejoicement at the time of the Geulah. The great Rav Teitelbaum Zatzal explained the story of King Saul, the first Jewish king, who made a mistake. The story we read before Purim of a war against Agag, against Amalek, and he lost his kingdom. But some say that that was his first sin. They say that he was very young in his age, and they meant to say that he was sin-free. So the great Rabbi Mordechai of Chernobyl explained, look, if you go by the text of the book of the story of Shaul, the King Saul, you can say that he did not want to eradicate Amalek, to get rid of Agag, because he felt as a king of the nation that the nation of Israel are not ready for the final Geulah. Only the righteous, only the tzaddikim yigalu. Therefore King Saul felt that people are not ready for that. And therefore we follow from that direction and said, in our days, since so much Jewish blood spilled over particularly past 100 years, not only World War II, but so much more, so therefore the idea that our nation still hold love of God, believe in Him and trusting Him and have a hope, therefore we bless that we are all be married שנזכה לגאולה שלמה במהרה בימינו אמן. הדרן הלך אלו מציאות.